Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take this huge stack of sources, research, and notes, and we boil it all down to get you the concentrated knowledge you need to be seriously well-informed on a topic.
Yeah.
Today, our mission is, well, it's a shortcut.
Hmm.
A shortcut to understanding achievement itself. We are going deep into the foundations of personal success, and specifically, the core principles from Napoleon Hill's landmark work, Think and Grow Rich.
And it's so important to frame this correctly. We're not just, reading a self-help book here. This is an analysis of a philosophical system that was born out of maybe the greatest challenge in modern economic history.
Great Depression.
Exactly. The sources are clear that Hill researched and codified all of this during the turmoil of the 1930s. And the relevance today, it's profound, especially after the upheavals we've all seen, like the volatility in 2008 or, all the market shifts since then.
The origin story of the book is what makes it so compelling. Hill's whole mission was to uncover this so-called magic formula, a universal principle of success that Andrew Carnegie, the industrialist of his time, shared with him.
Right. Carnegie essentially threw down a gauntlet. He challenged Hill to spend 20 years of his life studying and interviewing the most successful people in America to prove this formula actually worked, to create a blueprint for the average person.
An immense, and I think it's important to note, self-funded task.
Oh, completely. He spent 2 decades testing this secret, observing hundreds of these absolute titans. We're talking Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller, Thomas Edison, Charles M. Schwab. The list goes on.
The promise is audacious, really. It's that the formula is a shortcut. If you grasp it, if you apply it, success is, well, it's attainable.
And to really get the stakes here, we have to look at the first big example of this formula in action. It's right at the beginning of his research, the transaction that created the United States Steel Corporation.
Yes. And it wasn't even Carnegie who did it. It was his young associate, Charles M. Schwab.
Right. The sources detail how Schwab, who was president of Bethlehem Steel at the time, he conceived this plan to consolidate all the major steel companies into one single powerful entity.
Yeah.
He laid out this incredibly clear, detailed, full-fledged program.
And this plan, it was so compelling, so clearly articulated, that it became the foundation for the whole merger.
Immediately. It was a mastermind operation in practice. And when we talk about success, we need to talk numbers.
So how staggering were the results of that one application of the formula?
The initial transaction, guided entirely by Schwab's application of this philosophy, was worth $600 million at the time to the people involved.
$600 million.
Yeah.
In the early 1900s.
Yeah. Using modern multipliers, that's roughly $12.5 billion in today's money.
Wow.
So that proved to Hill and to everyone else that this wasn't just theory, it was a mechanism, a proven mechanism for creating wealth that was available to anyone who was ready for it. And that's the ultimate demanding takeaway from the author. The secret is there if you know what it is that you want.
And that you're willing to pay the price.
The mental price, exactly.
That is the perfect foundation. Knowing what you want definitively. That's the first hurdle. So let's unpack this whole journey, starting with the absolute bedrock principle. Step 1, the power of burning desire.
Desire. As Hill defines it, it's the starting point of all achievement. It's the first step to riches. But, and this is crucial, it's not just a hope. It's not a mild preference or some timid wish.
It's got to be more than that.
Oh, way more. The sources just hammer this point home again and again. It has to be a keen, pulsating, a burning desire that just transcends everything else. It has to become an obsession, a definite purpose.
We hear a lot about visualizing success, but Hill's idea of desire is so much more visceral. It's demanding. The anecdote that really captures this is the story of Edwin C. Barnes and Thomas Edison.
It's the perfect illustration because Barnes had none of the conventional tools for success. The story goes he climbs off a freight train in Orange, New Jersey, no money, no connections, and he looked, in Hill's words, like an ordinary tramp.
But his mindset.
But his thoughts, his internal state, were those of a king. His mind held one single, consuming, non-negotiable obsession. He was going to become the business associate of the great Thomas Edison.
What's wild is that he didn't even know Edison, did he? This wasn't based on some job ad or a LinkedIn connection.
Not at all. When he walked into that office, this desire wasn't a whim. It had been dominating his mind for a long, long time. Edison later said, Barnes stood there looking like he hadn't eaten in a week, but the expression on his face, it just screamed determination. He was ready to stake everything on getting what he came for.
But the opportunity he got was the exact opposite of what he wanted. He wasn't offered a partnership. He was offered menial work.
Yes, For 5 years, which sounds, I know, like stubborn foolishness.
Right. Unless Edison saw something deeper in him, why didn't he just give up? Why not go try for a sales job somewhere else?
Because, and Hill uses Barnes to highlight this, he had absolute definiteness of purpose. He never once wavered from that single goal. I will be Edison's associate. He took the menial job, the absolute lowest position, because it physically put him inside the orbit of his goal.
So for 5 years, nothing.
5 long years. No ray of hope, no promise of attainment, nothing, until the opportunity he was waiting for, distributing a new Edison dictating machine, finally appeared.
So on the outside, he's a failure for 5 years, but inside his own head.
Internally, he'd already won. In his mind, he was the partner of Edison every single minute of that time. And this is where that idea of burning the bridges behind you comes in. He didn't say, I'll try this for a few months. He said, I will be his associate and I will stand by until I succeed.
It's such a key distinction, that difference between a wish and a burning non-negotiable obsession. But okay, how do you, the listener, actually transmute that raw desire into its financial equivalent? Hill doesn't just leave it as an emotion. He gives 6 very definite practical steps.
And these steps are the bridge. They're the practical link between that intangible thought and a concrete plan of action. And they're vital because they force definiteness. And Hill argues that definiteness has this profound psychological power. The second you define your desire in concrete terms, you pull it out of fantasy and into the realm of the possible.
Let's break down the first 2. They seem to be all about quantification and commitment.
Precisely. Step 1. You have to fix the exact amount of money you desire. Not plenty of money, not enough to be comfortable. Why? Because vagueness is the enemy of goals. The mind needs a target.
And step 2.
Step 2. You determine exactly what service or product you will give in return for that money. And Hill is crystal clear here. There is no such thing as something for nothing. The universe runs on exchange. You have to define the value you're going to deliver.
I think step 2 is the one that gets glossed over by people. It forces you to look in the mirror, doesn't it? To say you deserve $1 million, you have to be able to justify the service that provides that much value to other people.
Absolutely. That psychological hurdle of defining the service in step 2, that's what separates the dreamer from the achiever. It forces you to shift from what you want to what you're willing to give.
Okay, so then we get to timing and execution.
Yeah.
Steps 3 and 4.
Right. Step 3. Establish a definite date for possession. This creates urgency, a timeline. It kills procrastination. And step 4, create a definite plan and start immediately. Whether you feel ready or not, Hill really stresses this. Immediate action. Hesitation just paralyzes your creative faculties.
So even a flawed plan in motion is better than a perfect plan on the shelf.
Infinitely better.
And the final 2 steps are about embedding this whole thing deep into your subconscious.
Yes, this is where autosuggestion comes in, which we'll get to. Step 5, write it all down. A clear, concise statement of all 4 points: the amount, the service, the date, the plan. Then step 6, which is the most critical part, read that statement aloud twice a day, once before bed and once when you wake up.
And as you're reading it.
You have to see it. You have to visualize yourself already in possession of the money. Feel the emotions of having achieved it. That repetitive, emotionalized reading is what turns the desire into a program. And that requires stamina.
It requires immense stamina, which leads perfectly to the next element we saw in Barnes and also in this story of R.U. Darby, persistence.
Yeah.
Darby's story starts with maybe the most famous failure in all of achievement literature, quitting 3 feet from gold.
Darby gets this gold fever, heads west. After weeks of just brutal labor, he strikes a rich vein of ore. He goes back, raises money for machinery, but after he drills deeper, the vein vanishes.
It's gone.
Gone. It was a subtle geological fault line, and in his despair, Darby he quit. He sold all the machinery and the claim to a local junk man for a few $100.
And the lesson, the devastating lesson, came almost immediately.
The junk man was smart. He knew what he didn't know, so he hired an engineer. The engineer looked at it and correctly guessed the fault was minor. He said, drill just 10 feet further. And as it turned out, the gold was only 3 feet from where Darby had stopped.
He lost a fortune because he just lacked that one thing: persistence.
But that loss became the foundation for his later success. He recouped his failure, not by finding more gold, but by learning how to sell.
He went into life insurance.
Yep. And remembering that moment, stopping 3 feet from gold, he made a vow he would never, ever quit just because people said no. He profited psychologically from his quitability by building stickability. He reframed every refusal as just a test. And in his prime, he became one of this tiny elite group selling over $1 million of life insurance a year.
What's so interesting is that the source of that stickability, it wasn't some business guru. It was a small sharecropper's child, the 50-cent lesson.
This little anecdote is it's about the raw power of persistent desire. Darby was helping his uncle, who was this powerful and imposing guy who owned a wheat mill. A little girl, the daughter of a tenant farmer, comes in and very meekly asks the uncle for 50 cents that was owed to her mother.
And the uncle who had a temper.
He just explodes. He barks at her, tells her to go home. A reasonable person would have run out of there.
Yeah, but she didn't.
She didn't move an inch. She yelled again, threatened her. She just stood there, these big eyes locked on her desire for that 50 cents, just absolute. And Darby says his uncle, this powerful man, finally just sighed, laid down his tools, reached into his pocket, and gave her the 50 cents.
So this tiny child with nothing but unyielding desire just conquered this powerful adult authority figure.
It was an incredible display of focus. Darby said he spent years trying to figure out that strange power. He eventually realized that the child had demonstrated a desire so persistent it just bent reality to her will. And he credits his entire sales career to that single moment. Every time a prospect said no, he saw that child standing there. He realized most of his big sales were closed long after the prospect had already said no. Persistence is the habit that it masters defeat.
And that kind of dogged determination is what gives life to the next crucial step, isn't it? Faith. You can't persist if you don't actually believe you'll eventually succeed.
Exactly. That's the transition to step 2, which is faith. Hill defines it as the eternal elixir. But functionally, it's the mechanism that gives life, power, and action to your thoughts. It's the starting point for riches because it's the only thing that can transform a thought vibration into its spiritual equivalent. It's the only known antidote for the fear of failure.
Okay, but if faith is so critical, how do you just get it? It sounds like you either have it or you don't, but Hill presents it like a technique.
It is entirely a psychological technique. That's what makes it accessible. Faith is a state of mind that can be induced through autosuggestion or self-suggestion. The mechanism is this: emotionalized thoughts. Thoughts mixed with deep feeling or feeling mixed with faith. They begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent.
So it's not enough to just think, I will be rich. You have to feel it.
You have to feel the reality of it. The subconscious mind, which is where all this emotionalized thought lives, it's infinitely receptive. It doesn't judge, it doesn't filter, it just accepts whatever you put there through repetition. And that's why step 6 of desire reading your goal aloud every day with emotion is so mandatory. You are programming your subconscious to accept that reality as inevitable.
So you're essentially hacking your own internal operating system to delete the possibility of failure. It reminds me of that poem Hill uses, the one that says, if you think you'll lose, you're lost. But sooner or late, the man who wins is the man W thinks he can.
That poem is the perfect summary of autosuggestion. You don't wait for faith to show up. You build it deliberately. You feed your mind these statements until your subconscious accepts them as fact. And when that happens, the thought transforms from a static idea into this living, active force.
And when you apply that collectively, its power is just astonishing, which Hill shows with his example of Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, Gandhi is a fascinating example for a book on riches because he was famously anti-materialist. But Hill uses him to show the sheer scale of collective faith.
He had none of the usual tools of power.
None. No money, no armies, no battleships, no permanent home. And yet he wielded this immense power over hundreds of millions of people. How? He did it by creating faith and then transplanting it into the minds of 200 million individuals.
That's a staggering feat of mental influence.
It is. He got this massive number of minds to coalesce and move in unison as a single mind. Hill doesn't frame it as a political victory. He calls it a miracle, achieved not with force or finance, but with the singular power of collective faith. The argument is, look, if one man can generate that in 200 million people, you can certainly generate it in yourself.
So we have desire as the fuel, faith as the engine, autosuggestion as the ignition. Now we get to the intellectual tools, the workshop, where the blueprints are actually drawn up. And that's imagination, the 5th step.
Yeah. Imagination is literally the workshop of the mind. It's where all plans are fashioned, where desire is given form and action. Hill is adamant that our only limitations are in how we develop and use this faculty. He says the world we live in now, with all its rapid change, it's the most fertile time in history for new ideas.
And he breaks it down into 2 distinct forms of imagination. Both are necessary, but they do very different things.
That's right. The first is synthetic imagination. This is the practical one, the one most of us use every day. Think of it like an architect. It doesn't create anything truly new. It just arranges old concepts, ideas, or plans into new combinations. It works with what's already there, your experience, your education, your observations.
So that's the day-to-day innovation.
Hmm.
But then you have the high-level, almost mystical one, creative imagination.
This is where true genius operates. Creative imagination draws on the unknown. It's receptive to thought vibrations from outside your own conscious mind. Those flashes of inspiration, the hunches, the brilliant ideas that just seem to pop into your head from nowhere. When you consciously cultivate the other steps, you open the door to this faculty. You make yourself receptive to what Hill calls infinite intelligence.
The world demands practical dreamers, as he says.
Exactly. People who can harness these unseen forces and turn them into tangible success.
And we see how ideas translate into fortunes perfectly in the story of the enchanted kettle, the origin of Coca-Cola.
It's a remarkable case study. It starts with an old doctor who has the secret formula. He sells the formula, an old kettle, and a wooden paddle to a young drug clerk named Asa Candler for his entire life savings. $500.
And the doctor just thinks he's getting out of debt.
Yeah, he's relieved. But Candler saw something completely different. He wasn't just buying a formula, he was buying an idea. He then used his imagination to refine and market it. The kettle and the formula were just the vehicles. The incredible profit that followed only happened after Candler mixed in an ingredient the doctor knew nothing about. Imagination.
Backed by a definite purpose.
And a willingness to persist. Candler was the prototype. He knew the value of setting and writing down goals for distribution and scale. And that $500 idea created a vast, resilient empire that was still providing jobs even during the Great Depression. It's just absolute proof that thoughts are things.
And for another powerful combination, definite purpose plus a strict timeline, we have the story of Dr. Frank W. Gonzalez.
Gonzalez had this deep desire to start a new kind of college, one based on the idea of learning by doing. He knew he needed $1 million. He'd been sort of wishing for it for 2 years. But when he finally made a definite decision, he set a deadline. I will get the money within 1 week.
That decision must have taken immense faith. It seems like it triggered a huge psychological shift.
It did. He said this strange feeling came over him, like a voice inside him said, the money was waiting for you all the time. He immediately called the newspapers and announced a sermon for the next morning titled, What I Would Do If I Had $1 Million. He preached that sermon with everything he had, focusing on his detailed, practical plan for the school.
And in the audience was Philip D. Armour, the meatpacking magnate.
He was. And he was so moved by the definiteness and the passion of the plan that he went up to the pulpit, shook Gonzalez's hand, and offered him the entire $1 million the next morning. The key insight is that riches, especially huge riches, aren't about luck or just hard work. They come in response to definite demands based on definite principles, all catalyzed by imagination.
Okay, so as we move from the conceptual tools to their application in the real world, we hit the 7th step, which is all about execution. Definiteness of decision. And this, Hill argues, is fundamentally tied to courage.
The ability to make decisions quickly and definitively. That's a characteristic that starkly separates the successful from the unsuccessful. Successful people make decisions promptly, and they change them slowly, if at all. Indecision, procrastination, they're fatal.
And he has that warning about talking too much.
Yes. Keep a closed mouth and open ears and eyes. He warns that people who talk too much disclose their plans, and that allows skeptics and external forces to defeat them before they even start. Genuine power is often shown through modesty and silence about one's goals.
That feels a little counterintuitive today, with all the talk about collaboration.
Well, it might speak to protecting an idea when it's still in that fragile, nascent stage, before it has momentum. External criticism is designed to plant seeds of doubt. And Hill points to these incredibly high-stakes historical examples to show the kind of courage that's required in decision-making.
Like Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation.
A monumental decision. He acted knowing full well it would turn thousands of friends and supporters against him, that it would mean death for thousands on the battlefield. But the most profound example he gives is the birth of the United States itself.
When those 56 men risked everything by signing a piece of paper.
Everything. The decision they made in Philadelphia on July 4th, 1776, that was an act of definitive, courage-backed decision-making. They were staking their lives and their fortunes on it. But Hill traces the real power back even further to 1770, when Samuel Adams and John Hancock stood up and demanded the ejection of British soldiers from Boston.
That was the singular decision that started it all.
It was the spark. They held a secret meeting, locked the door, and demanded that no one leave until they had decided to organize a Congress of the colonists. That definite decision, made under immense pressure, ensured victory long before the armies ever reached Yorktown, because the spirit of that decision was in the heart of every soldier. That same spirit, applied to your own life, is the power that ensures success.
And that power, that follow-through, it relies entirely on the eighth step: persistence. This is where the rubber really meets the road.
Persistence is the fusion of willpower and desire. It creates an irresistible pair. Hill says a lack of persistence is one of the biggest causes of failure. Most people are great starters but terrible finishers. They give up at the first sign of defeat.
So persistence is a habit. It's a muscle you have to build, not something you're born with.
It's a state of mind that can be induced. And those who cultivate the habit of persistence, they essentially have insurance against failure. They eventually reach their goal, but they get something much more important than just the money. They get the profound knowledge that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. The failure itself becomes the lesson.
The novelist Fannie Hurst is a great example of this.
Oh, a fantastic case study. She got 36 rejection slips from one publisher before they finally accepted her work.
36.
The average writer would have quit after the first one, or maybe the fifth. She persisted for 4 years through all that continuous defeat. And eventually she sold the movie rights to one of her novels for $100,000, an astronomical sum back then. Persistence is the gatekeeper that tests you, to make sure only the truly committed get through.
Okay, so moving from these internal principles to the external market, Hill shifts his focus to marketing personal services. And he emphasizes this huge shift in economic relationships, the end of leadership by force.
Historically, leadership by force, dictators, kings, autocratic bosses, it's just not sustainable. History shows it's always replaced by leadership by consent, which is based on cooperation and goodwill. And this applies directly to the new economy. The public is the real employer. The capital owner and the worker are really fellow employees whose shared job is to serve the public efficiently.
It's a total inversion of the old way of thinking.
It's the death of the old public be damned policy of the robber baron era. That's been replaced by the we are obligingly at your service policy. And the practical takeaway for you, if you're looking for an opportunity, is profound. Stop hunting for a job or an opening. Concentrate instead on what value, what ideas or services you can give that nobody else is giving.
And your pitch has to have that same definiteness we've been talking about.
Absolutely. You have to present a definite written plan of action to an employer, focusing on how your plan benefits the company, not just on the salary you want. The world pays for what you do, not just for what you know.
But the ultimate application of all this requires more than just you. It requires cooperation. Which brings us to the ninth principle, the powerful concept of the mastermind.
The mastermind is defined as the coordination of knowledge and effort in a spirit of harmony between two or more people for the attainment of a definite purpose. And it's crucial because real power, especially financial power, is only attained through organized cooperative efforts. No one achieves massive, lasting success completely alone.
And the sources suggest something beyond just teamwork here. There's a psychic phase that elevates the group. This sounds like more than a conference call.
It's the abstract spiritual core of it. Hill suggests that when two minds meet, they create this third, invisible, intangible force, like a third superior mind. Think of it like an energy accelerator. When a group of brains coordinate in harmony, the increased energy created becomes available to every individual brain in that group.
So the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, and the collective energy actually elevates everyone's thinking. Where do we see this in action?
Look at Andrew Carnegie. His success was entirely due to his mastermind group, a small cabinet of incredibly talented specialists. Or Henry Ford. He started with poverty and no formal education. His world-changing strides really began when he allied himself with other great minds. Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, John Burroughs.
He wasn't just networking, he was actively absorbing their mental energy.
Exactly. Hill argues Ford absorbed their vibrations of thought into his own mind. He was effectively appropriating their collective intelligence, their experience, their knowledge. He achieved power by consciously allying himself with the great. The mastermind isn't just about pooling knowledge. It's about merging mental energies to access a higher level of creative thought.
Speaking of powerful forces, Hill identifies one human emotion as the strongest of all, which, when channeled correctly, can launch someone into genius mode. The sex urge, accessed through sex transmutation. This is maybe the most delicate principle in the book.
It is, but it's treated in the sources as a purely scientific and psychological observation about creative energy. Transmutation here just means switching the mental focus from physical expression to creative, constructive action. The sex urge is the most powerful human drive. So when that driving force is harnessed and redirected, it's capable of lifting people into genius mode because it gives them this superpower for intense, focused action.
And it's important to clarify, Hill isn't advocating for repression here, but for redirection.
Correct. The source material is clear. It's not about repression. It's about approaching sexuality from a positive, balanced state of awareness that conserves and channels that energy. It can be transmuted into art, literature, or just concentrated business effort. Hill suggests that most people who achieve true greatness harness this force as a primary stimulant for their work.
But if this energy is so powerful, why do most people fail to harness it until later in life?
Hill's analysis of over 25,000 people showed that huge success rarely happens before age 40, and often not until after 50. The main reason he found was the tendency to dissipate that energy through overindulgence during their most potent years, in their 20s and 30s. Geniuses are the ones who voluntarily use that emotional energy as a mind stimulant for creative effort.
And deep love seems to be the ultimate refinement of that energy.
Absolutely. Hill notes that the emotion of love brings out our artistic and aesthetic nature. He points to Napoleon Bonaparte, who was seemingly invincible when inspired by his first wife, Josephine, but whose power and judgment declined after he put her aside. And Lincoln's genius was awakened by the deep love he felt for Anne Rutledge. The energy from that emotion, even just the memory of it, is enough to lift you to a higher plane of creative effort.
So all these principles, desire, faith, imagination, transmuted energy, they're all necessary to access the ultimate faculty, what he calls the sixth sense. This is where it gets pretty abstract.
The sixth sense is creative imagination used deliberately. It's the culmination of everything else. Hill defines it as the medium of contact between the finite human mind and infinite intelligence. Functionally, it's like a guardian angel or an internal antenna that warns you of dangers and notifies you of opportunities. It brings those sudden flashes of insight. It's what separates a true genius from someone who just relies on their education.
And this isn't something you're just granted. It takes years of intense cultivation.
It's the final frontier of the mind. Hill insists it's rarely available before age 40, and often not until after 50. Why? Because the spiritual and mental forces it's related to, they only mature and become usable through years of meditation, self-examination, and serious, continuous thought.
And we have a practical model for this from a scientist who actively cultivated it, Dr. Elmer R. Gates.
Dr. Gates, who created over 200 patents, used what he called his personal communication room. It was completely soundproof and light-controlled to eliminate all external distractions. He would go in, sit at a table, and concentrate intensely on the known factors of a problem he was working on. Then he would hold a perfect mental picture of the desired unknown factors in his mind.
And just wait for the solution to appear.
Exactly. He waited until ideas began to flash into his mind. On one occasion, the ideas came so fast he wrote for 3 hours straight, filling notes with principles and inventions that had no parallel in the known science of the time. This wasn't guesswork. It was a deliberate, controlled method.
And Hill himself adopted a similar ritual, his famous nightly council meeting with his invisible counselors.
Yes, every night before sleeping, he'd hold these imaginary meetings with a group that included Emerson, Lincoln, Carnegie, Napoleon. His purpose was to impress his own subconscious with their character traits and also to receive ideas through the sixth sense. He credited this practice entirely for his most inspired ideas and for helping him navigate really grave emergencies.
Okay, so now that we've covered the path to power, we have to talk about the internal barriers that sabotage it all. Hill outlines the major obstacles, starting with the 6 basic fears that hold people back.
The most common and most damaging is the fear of poverty. Hill argues nothing brings a person so much suffering and humiliation. Poverty creates this feeling of inferiority, this sense of being less than others, even when you know you aren't.
And the second one, the fear of criticism, that seems to prevent the use of imagination in decision-making we just talked about.
It's almost universal, and its effects are fatal to achievement because it destroys initiative. The symptoms are everywhere: self-consciousness, nervousness, a refusal to state your beliefs openly for fear of being ridiculed. It paralyzes people.
And the other 4 round out the list of these mental handcuffs.
The remaining four are the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. The greatest remedy for all these fears is a burning desire for achievement, backed by useful service to others. A busy, purposeful person just doesn't have time to dwell on anxiety.
And maybe the most fatal habit of all is building what Hill calls the 57 famous alibis, the excuses people use to justify their lack of effort.
Alibis are the excuses. If I had money, if I had a better education, if luck weren't against me. The tragedy is that people who fail know all the reasons for failure, and they spend their mental energy defending these alibis because they've become emotionally attached to their own excuses. But the world doesn't care. It only wants to know one thing. Have you achieved success?
So the answer to overcoming the fears and the alibis is just self-discipline and a constant focus on that definite purpose.
Absolutely. Mind control is the result of rigorous self-discipline and habit. The most practical method is to keep the mind busy with a definite purpose, backed by a definite plan. If you let others do your thinking for you, or you waste energy on alibis, you are, in Hill's view, personally guaranteeing your own failure.
To bring all this back down to earth, Hill finishes by looking at the broader economic reality, the law of economics that governs opportunity. He uses this powerful example of a simple breakfast to make his point.
It's a brilliant thought experiment. It shows the critical role of organized capital. He asks you to analyze the cost and sourcing of a simple breakfast. Orange juice from Florida, wheat from Kansas, tea from China, bananas from South America.
The sheer complexity of that simple meal is staggering when you think about it.
It is. The cost is remarkably low. But the real lesson is the mechanism that allows it to happen at all. Imagine trying to gather that breakfast without the capitalist system. You'd have to physically go to China for the tea. That breakfast couldn't be delivered at any price if organized capital hadn't provided the machinery, the ships, the railroads, and the huge armies of trained workers to operate them.
So organized capital is this kind of mysterious benefactor that provides the freedom and opportunity for all of this.
Exactly. Which leads to the unyielding law of economics. This law, Hill asserts, can't be swayed by politicians or unions. It keeps perfect accounts. Riches can only be accumulated by rendering useful service of equivalent value. There is no system, moral or legal, where you can get something for nothing. Get without giving is impossible long term.
So those who try to demand more than they deliver are eventually penalized by this law.
That is the source material's conclusion. It states that the law ensures only those who focus on valuable service can accumulate wealth. But for those who embrace these principles, especially in the American economic system, the opportunity is boundless. The freedom to think, to choose, combined with the immense spending power of the public, it just ensures opportunity for those who apply these principles.
What an incredible, thorough journey. From kindling that burning desire and fortifying it with self-induced faith to using imagination to create a plan and persistence to see it through, the entire path rests on self-mastery and applying these psychological principles.
And that leads us right back to the ultimate, most difficult step, the sixth sense, or creative imagination. If the most successful people in history achieved greatness by transmuting their strongest emotions, like the sexual urge, into highly focused creative effort, what conscious, deliberate mechanism beyond just logic and reason can you harness today to elevate your own work, your own definite chief aim, to the genius mode? The development of that faculty, that direct link to infinite intelligence, it's not a simple choice. It requires years of dedicated meditation, self-examination, and serious, continuous thought. That's the final, ultimate challenge this philosophy leaves you with. What are you willing to dedicate to open that final creative door?